like check that. Welcome to the second seminar in the webinar series of the working group on co-creating water knowledge. That the helping hydrology engaging local people in one global world scientific decade initiative. This is the working group on co-creating water knowledge, and this is our second seminar series. Today's topic is making the informal legible, how community engagement improves quantitative data. I'm Adeyemi Olushola. I'm not the one to deliver today's topic. I would introduce the speaker shortly. And also, I'm just one of the coordinators of this seminar series. With me also is Dr. Lydia Kumiski, who is also one of the coordinators, and we've been doing this together. This seminar series wouldn't have been made possible without the support of the working group leaders on co-creating water knowledge. That's Giulio Castelli, Natalie Capali, Ben Howard, and Uta Buyak. Before the end of this seminar series today, we'll give them some couple of minutes to say one or two things about the working group. Before we go on, it is essential to set the tone for today's conversation by acknowledging the land on which we gather together. This acknowledgement is more than formality. It's a meaningful reminder of the past, the present, and the future. Therefore, we need to honor the land. We center ourselves on the values that shape our relationship with nature and also with one another, anchoring us in the collective responsibility and purpose that guide the important work that lies ahead. So I'll be doing the land acknowledgement for York University, and you are free to also do yours or just listen to as I read through the land acknowledgement. We recognize that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with territories upon which York University campuses are located, and this precedes the establishment of York University. York University itself acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been taken care by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Palm Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. We have some series of questions. You can introduce yourself, your organization, your role, if you want to. And then also, we have a small poll that would run now, just in the next couple of minutes before we introduce today's speaker. So I'll bring up the poll now, and then just tell us what you think about the question, and then would close that after a while and would continue today's discussion. So what does co-creation mean to you? Okay, is it visible? Okay, I have one response. Okay, funny enough, I think everybody's seen the response, but I'm not seeing the response. So yeah, so maybe Lydia, you can read out some of the responses because I'm not seeing the response.
I'm also not seeing them, but I think maybe if we end the poll, then they pop up.
Oh, okay. Okay. So we have 10 of 21.
If anybody else is writing, just get it in quick and then we'll end.
Oh, okay. So perhaps when we hit 70% participation, maybe I can hand it.
Yeah, I think we can end. Let's see if we can share results.
Oh, okay.
Can you see results? I can't see them. No?
Um,
Stop
someone is sharing the
sharing.
results.
It's saying that I'm sharing results, but I don't see
Oh,
myself sharing them.
oh, okay.
Maybe we can share them by email when we send around the
All right.
PowerPoint. We'll find them in Zoom somewhere.
Oh, okay. Maybe we'll share the results after the end of this talk. Thanks for participating. Let me go back. Okay. No. Oh, okay. Um, all right. So we go to today's talk. Now I will introduce today's speaker. Today's speaker is Brian Walters, um, whose research interests center on understanding and addressing water insecurity, particularly focusing on its seasonal dynamics in urban context. Brian is dedicated to exploring how fluctuations in water availability and accessibility impacts communities, especially in rapidly growing cities like Freetown in Sierra Leone. His work seeks to bridge the gap between traditional water security studies, which often concentrate on water quantity and quality, and water users' nuanced experiences. Brian integrates seasonal variations into the household water insecurity experiences framework and employs participatory action research methods. His aim is to involve community members in the research process to better understand and address their specific needs. His research also provides a comprehensive view of how water insecurity evolves through the year through longitudinal surveys and community engagement. Brand approaches this by contributing to more effective and adaptive water management strategies and policies, ultimately supporting resilience and sustainable practices in the global South. Brian is equally a PhD candidate here at York University. Brian, you now have the floor. And thank you once again for doing this.
Sure. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to give this presentation, and thank you all for coming to this presentation. I hope it proves useful as well as informative as we go forward. I want to start off just by talking quickly about the structure of this, so that way everybody has a bit of a roadmap. I'm just going to start with a self-introduction for a minute, but then I'm going to go on to talk about the origins, tools, and lessons that can be learned from participatory action research. I find that a lot of people struggle to have like a strong theoretical foundation for participatory action research or for community-based research. Just simple community involvement of their research can be quite difficult to justify through academic process. And so I'll be talking a little bit about the origins that I ascribe it to. And then I'm going to go into some tools that can be used to justify that, whether that may be major thinkers or tools to check yourself when you're actually involved in the community engaged process. And then the lessons learned are going to come from my research and experience in Sierra Leone itself. So my first introduction is that I do have a master's in urban planning and another in agriculture economics from the University of Illinois. The agriculture economics degree is what gave me all of my skills in quantitative analysis and statistics and a lot of geoprocessing of data. And my urban planning is more my quantitative aspects of key informant interviews, of ethnographic studies, and of where my participatory action research and community-based research really have their footings, really have their foundations. Currently, I'm a PhD in geography, and I use political ecology to understand more post-capitalistic approaches to human organization around water sources. I also use global health to make sure that my methodology stay robust and applicable around the world. And finally, I use systems thinking to kind of knit everything together. And I think what we're going to see as we go through this, especially my tools, we'll see each if any of you are familiar with these tools, you'll see exactly how they plug into each of these areas of research. The only thing I want to say before we really get started is that I'm assuming that my target audience of this research of this presentation is more physical science people, so hard sciences that are interested in working with with communities or being more participatory in their research. And so the purpose of this is to provide the tools to allow that. Or at least a good start to a strong foundation to build from, because there just is always more to do and more to learn for sure. So what do I study? I study, as Adiyeme pointed out, I study water insecurity in Freetown, Sierra Leone. And this is different than water security. Marginally, it's the flip side of the same coin. Water security, quantity and quality of water, but water security is the quantity and quality of water, just the availability of water, generally speaking. And water insecurity focuses more on the accessibility to water. What's the point of water if it's stuck in a water tower that you have no access to, even if it's right next to your house? What's the point of a massive reservoir of water if it's illegal to dig boreholes and wells? So focusing on insecurity is much more the human component, the end user perspective of water distribution. And that's what I focus on in my research. So the first place I'm going to start off with to give participatory research its stronger foundation is the origins of it within systems thinking. I was very surprised when I found out that there's a long history of participatory research in systems thinking. I didn't think that they would be related, but but I have found so many connections between the two, going all the way back to the 40s, that I think it's very arguable to say that participatory research has sorry, participatory research can can easily be ascribed to this area of research. I've heard of a lot of other people, including urban planners and others, who claim participatory research but started in their area of research, and that may be totally valid. But this is definitely a defensible history of participatory research's development through systems thinking. Just a tool, a way to use it that can be used to justify further research. So it's in the 40s. Kurt Lewin is somebody who we can classify as one of the founders of action research, meaning working with people to create actual differences from your research. This involves, the important aspects of this is bringing in a cyclical process to research of learning of questions that give answers, that give further questions, that give further answers, that give further questions, or problems that give solutions that produce new problems that produce new solutions. And we have to keep going through this process over and over again. There is no end zone. There is no final destination necessarily that we're looking for. A final solution just simply doesn't exist, but it is about working with people in order to find the solutions to the problems they currently face. Then we go into general systems thinking and cybernetics, which is a lot of feedback loops, which again, feedback loops is those cycles that one thing causes another thing, causes the original thing, causes the next thing. And these work with each other in order to produce themselves. This is more standardized in more kind of like a industrial way, or a systematic way, like a political system. It's being thought of at this time, but it does take its next step in the 1960s. Systems thinking takes the next step in the 60s in realizing that you can design the most perfect technical system of a political system or a manufacturing system or whatever you're working on, but humans interact with it. And then causes a lot of friction, a lot of problems. You need to be able to understand how the social aspect of a system works as well as the technical aspect to integrate them and create a truly good system. And this is what participatory research really starts bringing in, is you can understand the social bit. By in the 70s, they started realizing by engaging the people involved in the system, by inviting participation in the research project, not just as subjects, but as people who can contribute to research questions, as people who can contribute to research goals. And that's in the 70s. And then in the 80s, soft system methodology really started embracing just how complicated social systems are, far and above the actual hard systems that people were focused on beforehand. And so by using participatory research and community-based methods, you can generate a very rich very rich picture of a problem or a system, and you can tackle complex and even wicked problems through community-based research and soft system methodology. There's a couple of more after this, but I just wanted to really illustrate that if you're looking for a strong foundation of participatory research, systems thinking is a very good place to put that. The next tool that I wanted to bring to bear on this is actually just a simple researcher. Karen Backer, I'm sure many of you have heard of her, but she is a very, very, very strong foundation for justifying community-based approach. She really popularized the notion of the hydrosocial cycle. And to really talk about her, for those of you who haven't heard about her research or haven't read through her research, I simply just want to read this passage. I know this is kind of a don't do this in a presentation, but it's a slide full of text that I'm going to read because honestly, I can't really say it any better. But a focus on the materiality of water opens up an understanding that implications of its particular biophysical characteristics for the social relations, such as property institutions of its production. I think a political economic theory of a specific resource rather than of nature writ large must specify the particular social nature articulations between production and consumption and account for how H2O's biophysical characteristics both enable and constrain its own production. In other words, acknowledging the materiality of water involves recognizing the socially and temporally contingent limits to the utilization of H2O in line with human intentions. What she's doing is she's bringing together the idea that there is water, but there's also how we use it, and that can make a big difference in water availability and accessibility. Whereas H2O circulates through the hydrologic cycle, water as a resource circulates through the hydrosocial cycle, a complex network of pipes, water law, meters, quality standards, garden hoses, consumers leaking taps, as well as rainfall, evaporation, and runoff. Water is a dynamic resource landscape generated by the processes imperative in the uneven development of capitalism. This does not imply that a distinction is to be made between first nature and second nature. Water is simultaneously a physical flow, the circulation of H2O, and a socially and discursively mediated thing implicated in that flow. So the reason why I wanted to bring up Karen Backer and the way that she thinks about this in political ecology is simply to put that if you're interested in water in whatever form you are, and you want to bring people and you want to do more participatory research, we have to really recognize the connection between the two, and that's the hydrosocial cycle. The next tool that I'm interested in introducing and discussing in a foundation of a lot of the work that I do is strong versus weak theory, as put forth by J.K. Gibson Graham, which is a pair of political ecologists focused on decentralizing capitalism honestly, just decentralizing capitalism in general. And they start with their critique of strong theory, which is more of the hard sciences, which is more the prescriptive. They say that it's overly deterministic, all-encompassing. They are overly deterministic and all-encompassing theories. This is research that says, this is how things are, and therefore I can predict in the future, and therefore that's how it will be in the future. What will always be, and there's just simply no change in that. Even if that's something that you may put, I think one of the major things to think about is not that you automatically believe that any positivist research or predictive study actually believes in it, believes that the thing that the prediction will come to occur. It's not that if you're confronted with this, you may back off really quickly, but by simply presenting it as I can predict the future, you are reinforcing that future. And so Gibson Graham point out that if you look into the realities in human agency, you can actually change that future, and that's what we should be focusing on. So this comes in the form of economic and other systems diversities, where we should look at what exists outside of the mainstream right now and emphasize some of those. For example, commons-based practices, barter systems, informal economies, even gender labor are generally not embraced by, supported, or recognized by the main capitalist economy. But these are very functional, widespread systems that still work to organize behavior, even in those, and some of them that are very different than the system that we have today. This can be very much applied to any sort of water system that you may be interested in working with, whether that's a river system, whether that's a civil engineering system. Just because the municipal water supply is the dominant way of providing water to everybody around the world doesn't mean that that's what we should be 100% focused on in order to solve water crises. And we should be open to other possibilities. We should be open to contextual practices that are related to the people who live in the community and are served by the institutions and systems that we set up. We should also focus on the human agency, that humans will understand the future and change that future. We can predict it based on past occurrences, but humans will understand that and have the capacity of changing it going forward. So predicting a downfall or an uprise in water availability or accessibility will change based on the humans, and that needs to be incorporated in any sort of study. It also this weak theory also focuses on small scale, and that doesn't mean that it's exclusive to small scale. It just means that it requires efficacy over scalability. Generally, one of the major things that all research and implement and interventions require, or especially around water, is that it's scalable, that it continues to grow. But in reality, we might be looking for interventions, ideas, and research that simply work very, very well in the locations that we're interested in. And we can prioritize that. We can value that even more than the fact that they may not work everywhere at all at the same time. And finally, we should be focused on weak theory embraces the idea that you should worry about your focus. Are you focused about maximizing profit or benefiting the community? Are you focused on efficacy or ethical and equitable access? And the orientation that there's clear orientation recommendations in this book and in this idea, but it is important to understand what the fundamental values of any research or intervention is, especially around water. I think this is the last tool that I have. That's that I'm sure some of you also have come across in your research, but it's unseen ladder of public participation. This isn't something that I would ever really put into a research proposal or even cite in a research project, but this is a very practical checklist that I always look at whenever I'm thinking about my research partners or the people that I'm researching. This was developed back in the 60s, and it's 8 different steps of participation gathered in three groups, as you can see. Manipulation and therapy are about our non-participation, and that's because you treat if your relationship between you and the studying subject matter or the people or the communities is manipulation, fundamentally you're extracting what you want with no concept, with no with no concept of them as humans with agency. Therapy means that there's a strict hierarchy and that you have all the power and knowledge over the other person. If you find yourself in this situation, just keep trying to work your way up the ladder. The next one is degrees of tokenism. And we've all heard tokenism, and we've seen lots of cases where people claim to be participatory, but they really, really aren't. The first one is informing, where you just do your research, and then here's my published article if you want to read it about your own community. That's not really participation. The next one is consultation, which is the relationship between you and the community or you and the people, where you'll let them provide ideas, but you have absolute veto power and still a lot of control over the whole thing. But you do recognize that they can contribute to the community, to the project through their own intelligence and experiences. Placation is the recognition that they have power and agency over the project itself. However, you only sacrifice what you absolutely need to or change what you absolutely need to. These are all tokenisms. They're not real participation. Finally, we get up to the top 3, partnership being equal powers between you and the subject matter, but generally you're separate in the sense that both of you are achieving goals, but they are probably separate. And each side may have a lot of their own side goals or side benefits from this research or your intervention. Delegated power being they get to make all the decisions, but you still have absolute power and veto over them. And finally, citizen control is what we should be aspiring to, according to our named ladder of public participation. None of this is to say that everybody should always be citizen control. That's not necessarily what it is. It's an aspiration. It's something to be aiming at. It's something this is a tool to look at your research and your project and figure out where do I fit in here and how can I improve. And with the next section, I'm going to argue from my own example and my own experience that going towards this citizen control, going upwards in this public participation is not just about ethical considerations, which we can find all sorts of research on, but practical implications, practical benefits on research and just simply making the work better. So next project. Okay. So in my research, I think the best example of this is definitely my first solo research project, which I did in February of 2021, right in the middle of COVID in Freetown, Sierra Leone. I knew I wanted to work with the communities to figure out how their water markets worked, but I'd never been there as a researcher. I'd only been there for a week beforehand at one point as a tourist. And so the first thing I did was contact SLRC, the Sierra Leone Urban Research Center. I did this just simply by Googling Sierra Leone and urban research, because that's what I was trying to study at the time. And I was fortunate enough that SLRC came up. I sent them an email, asked them if I could work through them, work with them, if they knew surveyors, if they knew people I could hire. And they took care of just about everything. It was fantastic. And so I went when I landed, a lot of my project was set up and ready to go already because they are great experts and they know what they're doing. But I knew I really wanted to create more relationships both with the people at SLRC because that's who I had access to at the time. So I went to their offices every single day, even if I had no real work to do while I was in country, and I just talked to them, even if it was for an hour. People might get bored of me and I'd leave. That's fine. But every day I tried to make a point of going to SLRC and talking to their researchers. From this, I was able to I did a couple of I started training their people, their researchers a little bit on Excel and some other skills. And in this way, I was able to connect with a lot of people in Sierra Leone, a lot of researchers who knew a lot. And then we could just discuss research and they were able to point out a lot of problems with the approach to research that I had at the time because it was so naive. Um, because of those interventions, I also realized I wanted to extend my training period from 1 day to 4, not just because I wanted my surveyors to be trained on my survey, but I knew I needed to tweak my survey a lot in order to fulfill all of those suggestions. So we spent 4 days altering and honing my survey and working on my data gathering techniques and the where we would be working in order to make everything as simple and efficient as possible, but also a lot more accurate. And we're going to get to those benefits in a minute. When they went out into the field, I went with them. We had breakfast, and then I would go with I would go with one of them and watch at least one survey that they performed just to listen, because it was really important to me to get the context. Some of these questions took 5 seconds to answer. It was just yes or no, but it was fascinating and super helpful to develop the context that was involved with a 5 minute answer to a 5 second question. Sometimes that context was never going to be found in the survey. And so by being there and sitting quietly off in the corner while my surveyor actually asked the questions, I was able to learn a lot of context. I decided to stay after some surveys and continue in discussing informal background questions that I may have. And from that, I was often brought over to community leaders. And in this way, I was able to really start integrating myself in these communities by starting from the simple email to SLRC, to their researchers, to their surveyors, to the people that are being involved, and then back up to community leaders. This really started getting me integrated within the community. Finally, I started performing some side research for these community leaders, where I would go in and map out all their water sources and gather some information so that way they could present that information for their own advocacy. And because of this, I was then invited into some community group meetings where oftentimes I didn't contribute anything. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. I just waved hello, sat down in a chair, and I just spent time with them in their communities. And from this, I gained even further context into my research and into how the water markets worked. And it really vastly improved my understanding of the system in a very rapid pace. This sounds like it takes a lot of time, and while it does, and I'll talk about that in a minute, the important thing is that while it took more hours, it took far fewer months and years to fully understand these systems. And we came up with solutions like this. Like this is a side project that I worked on, where we were just I was given almost unlimited access to these communities to ask any questions I want, and a guide with a lot of legitimacy, like a local chief or a well-known youth leader who could take me around and show me all these water sources and gather information. And by gathering that information, even though this wasn't particularly helpful to the research that I was doing at the time because it hadn't gone through the research process, this is me acting more as a professional than an academic. It has set the foundation for my next research project, which builds a lot on these techniques. And then this is my research team, and these are the guys who taught me, I think, more about water and water markets in 4 or 5 months than I've learned in the 3.5 years before doing this water project, and the year and a half I've been at York PhD. I've been at York. So they deserve all the credit, and these are all members of the community. These are all people who live there. They were interviewing sometimes their neighbors and other people, but they really help me figure everything out. So the practical implications of all of this theoretical research, of all this theory, of all of the participatory research, of all being integrated in the communities, is like almost uncountable. We actually took my survey from an hour long to a 40-minute survey, which means we went from 400 surveys as a goal to 600 surveys on the same amount of budget, drastically increasing the statistical significance of some of our findings. We were able to, instead of asking for gallons or liters, use jerry cans or 5 gallons, which are the same thing there. But because of that, we were able to then figure out not only what's the most appropriate unit of measurement for the communities, but also how that precisely could translate into liters and gallons. So I could show that outside of the communities. You have no idea how many projects I've seen since then still asking how many liters and gallons people use or gather, which makes no sense to the local communities. We were able to, whenever I had questions during the analysis, I was able to text them to my connections. I was able to ask for interpretations. I was able to follow up at my leisure and for months on end afterwards, after finding contradictions. There were some problematic questions, like comparing yourself to your neighbor is almost taboo in the community, but that's a pretty common survey question. We were able to eliminate that. Because of the better community involvement, we get more access to more information, more context, and the whole research became so much more rich. And what I've also done is been able to use community involved research and all those community connections and all of that. Even though some of that work isn't publishable, I can now build off of that, as I said, into this new research project. So now I know that my research is going to have practical outcomes to the community. My research is far cheaper than it was the first time because I know who to contact within the communities, and because of my relationships with the research institutions, they know that I'm not just simply bypassing them. And in some ways where I kind of actually am, they're totally okay with it because of our long-standing relationship. We were able to take our average survey cost from I think about $15 down to $3 or $4 for this follow-up survey. Because I have more local partners, I have more access, I have more people who can contribute to ideas and thoughts. Also, I've been able to scale up my work from the 2 communities to 4, from 600 surveys over 2 seasons to 600 surveys every month over 12 months. And finally, what's really fascinating is by asking people in the communities what their problems are and what their concerns are, I'm able to then go back to the research, read the articles from the last couple of years, figure out where those questions match the literature, and now I know what the next questions are I'm going to be asking and pursuing in the communities are. So I have a never-ending access to questions and concerns. Let's see, I should have. And then this is my final slide, and we'll get into questions. But I want to point out that participatory research and community-based research is a skill. I would say, people who write books and be prescriptive about how to do it, I don't know. It's a skill. It's just like trying to write a book about playing basketball or having an act or any other skill that you may do. It takes time to practice and to do and make mistakes and all and to get involved. But it does take a lot of time. But what I would argue time and time again is that it takes more hours, but it takes far fewer months and years. And so depending on what your availability and your accessibility and your budgeting constraints are, participatory research is always valuable, is always important. Sorry, I'll just continue on because I'm not sure how I went into that thought. But I'd agree that it isn't appropriate for all research. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a thing that if your research doesn't involve human beings in its scope, then that's okay. I know some action researchers think that you should always involve humans. I'm a little bit more flexible personally. I also think that it's amazing how many opportunities that it reveals and opens up to researchers. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm now my new research is so much more in depth, is so much more accurate, so much more applied, is just so much better thought, is better thought out than it was before, and that just came from constant engagement with the communities. And finally, it looks different from everybody. The story I just told about community engaged research and meeting everybody and networking and doing all this will look totally different from somebody who's working in India or Canada or Europe. And it may look different based on just the researcher themselves. I try to network my way through. Some people have their own local connections already from their lives, or they have different techniques of approaching people. It's totally valid. It's a very loose confederation of techniques. But I hope that everybody who's interested in it finds their own form, practices their craft, and really finds a way to engage the communities in which they're working. Thank you. That's the whole presentation.
Oh, thank you very much, Brian, for the wonderful insights and interesting discussion. It's now time for questions within the next 10 minutes before we have some talk by the working group leader. So if you have questions, you can raise your hand and then we'll give you the floor to just unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, so questions?
If there's nobody, I might jump in with one, or while other people are pulling their questions together. Thank you so much, Brian. That was super interesting and very impressive, the number of surveys we're getting done per month. So really interesting to see all of those results. I was just curious about what influence you think that your engagement has had on the capacity or agency of those researchers in CERC and also those kind of community leaders. What are the kind of benefits of the influence you think that they've gotten out of it?
Yeah, and those are two separate questions because the researchers, while a lot of them are from the communities, do have their own professional goals separate from the community leaders. And so one of the things I'd like to do is I'm naturally a very technical person. All of this like people stuff is very much a learned thing because it was pragmatic and beneficial and really helpful. But what I try to do so that way I'm not just annoying at their office is I volunteer to train them on Excel. I volunteer to train them on GIS. I volunteer to train them on the skills that I've learned in the past. And I do have a teaching background that helps a lot with that. And so I've seen situations where, so the last time I was there, we set up like a whole Excel class and I tried to formalize it and gave it to them. And I found out when I went back about a couple of months ago that they're still using that training program for new members of the research institute. And as for the communities, I'm a little skeptical that I helped them at all, to be honest, because it was my first project. And I'm not sure exactly how you advocate with that piece of paper that I showed. But the key isn't that I know how they do stuff, it was that they asked for it. And so I asked if there's anything I can do to help, and they said we would really we're often going to these advocacy or we're going to the city hall, we're going to the UN, we're going to these NGOs, and we're just going and telling them our stories, and it doesn't seem to be enough. And so they wanted that map, they wanted that data, they wanted the PowerPoint so that way they could like impress the people with the funding. And so that's what they said that they were using it for. And as long as they've asked for it, then I am nobody to tell them that it's important or not.
Thank you very much, Brian. While others are still thinking about their questions, Natalie, please, you can unmute yourself.
Thanks, Brian. Excuse me. Thanks, Brian. That was super great and fun to hear about your whole learning process and community integration process. I was wondering about, you mentioned that you did this step where you took all the questions people had and matched them to the literature. And you said that very quickly, like it was sort of I don't know, trivial or automatic or something. But in my experience, that's been one of the hardest things that I've done because community concerns are often place specific or time specific in a way that scientific literature is not. And I was wondering if you could talk more about your maybe success or ease or frustration with that matching of community concerns with scientific, for lack of a better word, concerns.
Yeah. It's like 90% frustration because because like there's huge research institutes that are publishing papers every single week, every day, every month that like all this ink is being spilled, and then I go to the communities and I realize the problems are still basic in the sense that these are problems that could have been solved that the technical fixes have all been found in the 60s and the 50s. Like the technical problems have largely been solved. It's the social problems that are really hard. One of the things that I have been getting into a lot of my over the last couple of years is the critical aspects, is the anti-colonialist aspects, and there's a lot of space in there where people are asking questions, but I find that they're going too far theoretical and too far and not applied at all. And so what I actually tend to find is a lot of situations where there's a lot of criticisms that I can then say, and this is the practical implication. So if people are developing a super high theory of water accessibility, I can be like, and this is what it looks like in Freetown, because this is the problem that this is one of the problems that they're facing is accessibility with their neighbors, with their own water source, and then everybody else like having a small drought or gender-based violence happening over here. Instead of being able to say that like this is a potential outcome of water scarcity, I can say this is. I can then figure out how gender-based violence relates to water like geographically. These are the kinds of questions that I come up with from the literature. It's kind of fun to have the technical bits and like, okay, well, socially it's like this, but then they've almost gone too far. So you just bring that social stuff back to the applied. And that's what I actually find a lot of fun in is, or at least a lot of engagement with, is taking that social theoretical aspects and bringing it back to reality.
Oh, thank you very much, Brian. David, you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thanks, and thank you so much, Brian, for your presentation. Just put my camera on so that at least we can see each other. Is that better? Yeah, okay. So I saw there's a slide that you presented, you know, it made me reflect on the work that I also did, the one with the scales of tokenism, etc., etc. Trying to get, yes, please. So when I was doing my, yes, when I was doing my research project with communities, so I had read through this and I went in there at the back of my mind thinking, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be tokenistic. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be extractive, you know. In the process of the implementation, I could pick out phases where we had to be tokenistic, you know. You had to be extractive. So it wasn't a, at the end of the day, the whole assessment of the process would not fall under the tokenistic or the bad part. It would be somewhere in the middle. So I just wanted to hear from you, how did you balance that within did you get to those moments whereby you'd feel, okay, I feel I'm being a bit tokenistic here, or I have to then quickly transition back and get the balance. How did you deal with that?
Yeah. No, that's really hard. And to mitigate kind of the extractive nature that you brought up a moment ago, I kind of just it took me a while. This is all an experience thing. This isn't something that like I knew going in, but after a couple of weeks fighting with this whole extractive nature of research, sometimes I really started thinking, what if I didn't publish anything? What if I got hit by a car on the way home? Like, how could this project still be a success? And so I just started thinking, if everything fails, how can somebody somewhere benefit from this? And that helped with the extractive nature and treating it, and took away obviously like the therapy and manipulation aspect, because that's the other thing is the further down the list you go, the more about you make it. But the further up you go, the more about the community and the more people will benefit from it. So that's how I did that's how I always try to like combat the extractive nature. But as far as like pushing upward, what I find is like the standard is consultation. And so if you're anywhere above consultation, you're better than most other projects. And it all comes, and like I honestly think that the nature of the system that we all live in right now is like has like a momentum or an elasticity that brings you back to consultation, if not informing. So the farther you stretch away, the more it's just your personal knowledge and your personal expertise and your personal practice that you're focusing on more than like what's the perfect right way to do it. It's going to get harder the higher you go, and this systemically you're going to be drugged back down. So there's no answer here, just a recognition of those influences and a continual push to get to citizen control, continual push to get to delegated power. as high as you can, not just for ethical reasons, but as I've been trying to present a bunch of times, for practical reasons. It makes the research better.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Brian.
David.
David, you can unmute and ask your question. Yes.
There. Thank you, Brian, for the well-framed presentation. Davide, agronomist working with Tunisia, and I have a practical question about data ownership. How do you manage the accessibility and the recognition of the authorship of the people you involve in the data collection?
Yeah. I'll split it into thinking about data versus information. And so that I own the data, period. Like there's no other way around it, but the Excel spreadsheets, those are mine. And however, but the information is theirs. So so they have to, if for these maps, for example, they don't have access to the QGIS files or the Excel spreadsheets or the Kobo Collect, none of that. But if any one of them ever emailed me saying, hey, I need this, I'd make it for them. It's part of the job, in my opinion. Even a year or two after, though, they generally tail off and like dramatically decrease the months afterwards. So it's information versus data. My data, their information, and they can request it whenever they'd like in any form that they'd like, as long as, of course, it follows the IRB, the Ethics Review Board, and all that good stuff. Although I will tell you, I had a massive problem with these maps where I shared them with the municipal government, and I started seeing them pop up in presentations of other people advocating for water projects that I did not appreciate or agree with. If you're talking about that, I share the information with the people that, like these maps, I'll share this with the specific community groups that help me gather the data as is. But I also have a file with a watermark of my email address across the front now. That's the way I share otherwise. Even in a presentation, so that way if they take a picture of it, it still has my watermark. But like, yeah, if I'm not sharing it with somebody else, if I'm sharing with the government, I'm highly susceptible. I'm highly suspicious of that.
Thank you, Brian. Amai, yes, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. My name is Anaí Ocampo from the University of Chile. I work in socioecology in water problems. So I understand when you say starting a research during COVID in a new territory. So I'm going through the same. I have two questions. One is about the letter of participation somehow implies that it's a one-way decision. You know, you want to go to some level of the ladder, but it usually happens that you have to be able to read the context, how much you can really be involved with people. I have had situations in which research is between a very complicated and conflictive situation. So you have to somehow be able to go as far as they can, right? I don't know if you have been in that situation. And my second question is, I think it's a personal question. How do you feel in this working group that somehow is hosted in a hydrology society? I'm new to this. I participated recently in the meeting, and one of the researchers said something like, we have to remember we are hydrologists. And I thought, okay, am I in the right group? Because I'm not hydrologist. I won't ever be. And I jumped from sociology and political ecology, and most of the time I don't know what I am. But how do you feel? How do you feel we can, grow from here? That's it.
Yeah, I think both of those are very both of those I would approach from a very personal answer. So they're applicable to me and my way of thinking. It can be applied as you and everybody else see fit as well. But for me, I focus on the level of control that I have. So for this ladder, you're asking me like how it's like this whole this whole ladder, like I choose where I want to be. And like I say, yeah, and I'll take that responsibility and that blame if like I'm wrong somewhere somehow. And I think that's fair. But like I always try to push up higher. I think another flip side of that is you're saying like, so maybe your target people can't take full control because of maybe they don't have the technology or the ability, and so citizen control is simply impossible. And I'd agree. So you go as high as you can go in any particular situation. And sometimes it takes a lot of time. Or sometimes you're just unavailable. Like right now, I'm on a research project with a professor, and I have no control over this. And we're doing a survey in South Sudan from Canada. I have no control over this. So I always I try to push higher, but you just can't sometimes. I don't think that there's a real answer to this question in the end, and I don't want to. So I don't think there's a real answer to that, but I do think that it's not taking the power, it's taking the responsibility of like where you aim to be. And so that's what I try to aim to do. And as far as you said, don't forget we are hydrologists. Um, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to do what I would call like bounding, is say like these are our concerns in this meeting. So you may be concerned with all of these other things, but like this meeting is concerned with these issues, and that's totally legitimate and fair. Otherwise, we might go on for hours and days and whatnot. But I don't think that has any reflection on like whether you're a hydrologist or not. Just this particular meeting. So it's just a miss. I would read that as a misspeak, saying this meeting is related to hydrology only. And you take what you want and go do what you want, and then you go do with it at what you will afterwards. A lot of this stuff in this research, I was really frustrated because from my professors were like, go in, get your research, get your answers, and I'd be like, cool, but like, is this question make sense in the local context? And they'd be like, who cares? Like, just get the data out, and then publish your papers from the data set. And so I could just push on to whatever other realms that I'm interested in. Like the mapping wasn't part of my original research project. Adeyemi knows me because I'm annoying him, and it's like helping me understand how to measure rainfall data from satellite images because it doesn't exist. Trying to figure out how water, like the hydrogeology works, even though I come from more of a soft science urban planning background on these topics. Like just because the meeting and the information session is devoted to a certain topic doesn't mean that I have to be. So I just take it as it is, know that we're scaling or we're bounding our issue, and then move on afterwards to what's effective, what's pragmatic.
Thank you very much, Brian. On the note of the hydrologist, I would invite Natalie to speak about the group, and then perhaps also share insights that we are not all, hydrologists, quote unquote. So Natalie, please, you have the floor to talk about the working group. And thank you once again, Brian.
Yes, thank you all for attending today, and thank you especially to Adeyemi and Lydia for their organizational skill, and most importantly to Brian for his insights. Um, so this is one of our activities. I say "our," but I had really very little to do with it. Adeyemi and Lydia did everything, of the Co-Creating Water Knowledge Working Group, which is a subgroup of the Helping Decade of the IAHS, which is Hydrological Sciences. But the helping decade, of course, involves a lot of people. So even if you don't consider yourself a hydrologist with a capital H, you are all more than welcome to join the IAHS and join our working group. And I wanted to share the website. Can I? Oh, yes, now I can share it. Let's see. Surprise. And this is our website. We can put the link in the chat. And just to give you an idea, this is sort of an overview of some of our activities. Um, we meet regularly online for discussion, to look at, to work on some papers, to work on some collaborations, to organize conferences, to come together, to challenge each other. And the webinar series is probably our most, let's say, one of our main accessible activities, so you're all welcome. But if anyone also has ideas for future activities, you're welcome to join the group and propose future activities. So this is sort of an overview. On the website, you can find more details about our objectives. The decade is still young. We're in the second year of the decade, so you have lots of time to get involved. And yeah, you can find out more about the working group and join it on the website. So, and just get in touch with any of the working group leaders if you have trouble joining, or the link. I know the link sometimes with the Google sign up doesn't work. So if you don't hear from us soon after you join, just send us an email directly to our university emails accounts. So. And thank you to everyone who was from the working group and from outside the working group for joining today, and for everyone's enthusiasm. We were just in the I think we're considered one of the active working groups of the decade, so that's great news, and it's thanks to all of you. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
Sorry, that was a bit spontaneous there.
Thank you very much. Some last minute words from Lydia as we wrap up today's session.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone, and thank you for the brilliant presentation. I'm looking forward to the next webinar in January, and we'll send out more information about that soon.
Yeah, so on that note, I would like to appreciate everyone once again for joining us today. Thank you. We'll be sending the recording to each and every one of you. Have a wonderful new year in advance. We'll let you know of our next webinar series. To Brian, once again, thank you very much. To the working group leaders, Natalie, Julio, Ben, and Beatrice, thank you for this. And then to Lydia, thanks for the endless meeting. Do have a wonderful day, and hope to see you soon. Bye.